welcome to Orange County. As we have heard several times throughout the course of the jury selection proceedings, this is the case of the state of Florida versus Casey Marie Anthony. However, it is time to tell the story of a little girl named Kaylee. This isn't just a case about Casey Marie Anthony. It's a story about Kaylee Anthony as well. Kaylee Anthony was born on August 9th of 2005. It was a Tuesday. And Kaylee lived nearly every day of her life on a quiet residential street in Orlando called Hope Spring Drive. Her doting grandparents, George and Cindy Anthony, filled her room with toys and stuffed animals. Kaylee's room was decorated with every imaginable Winnie the Pooh item available. In the backyard of George and Cindy Anthony's home was every little girl's dream, a playhouse. Complete with her own mailbox, with her name and street address fixed. Kaylee's grandparents, George and Cindy, moved to Orlando in 1989 from Eastern Ohio. They came here with their children, Casey Anthony, the defendant in this case, who was 3, and her older brother, Lee Anthony, who at that time was about 7 years of age. They moved from Eastern Ohio to the address on Hope Spring Drive and have been there ever since. George Anthony, a former police detective in Ohio, has worked a variety of security jobs here in Orange County, as well as some other types of jobs. Cindy Anthony, a nurse, has worked continuously in the medical profession, working her way up to a management position. When their 19-year-old daughter, Casey, told them in June of 2005 that she was pregnant, they were concerned, yet elated at the prospect of becoming grandparents for the very first time. George and Cindy Anthony committed to helping their daughter financially and with providing support to little Kaylee Marie that a loving and stable home could offer. After a brief maternity leave, Mr. and Mrs. Anthony, George and Cindy Anthony, believed that their daughter, Casey, had returned to a job that she once had at Universal Studios. George and Cindy Anthony believed that Casey Anthony was a hard-working, single young mother. Over the next 2.5 years, Kaylee Anthony appeared to have an idyllic life. She was loved by her grandparents. They took lots of pictures of her. They doted on her. She was the apple of their eye. She did things like swim in the backyard, in the family's pool, an above-ground pool. She watched SpongeBob with JoJo She wore a Spider-Man outfit. And as I had mentioned, did a lot of smiling for the camera. Casey Anthony, Kaylee's mother, appeared to all outward observers to be what her parents thought she was. A loving mother working hard to provide support for her daughter. But as the evidence in this case and the investigation into the background of Casey Anthony will show, that was an illusion. Casey Anthony was not employed. Casey Anthony, dressed in work clothes, had a universal ID, and went who knows where for 2 years after Casey Anthony was born. Although the cracks in Casey Anthony's facade began to break and show themselves or be revealed in the weeks and months prior to June of 2008. Father's Day, June 15th of 2008, started out as a typical Sunday in the Anthony household. You will hear during the course of this case that George Anthony, at that time, in June of 2008, had a security job that had him working regularly from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. Cindy Anthony's job as a nurse manager had her working hours closer to 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. George Anthony worked that Sunday, Father's Day of 2008, starting his shift at 3 p.m. Cindy Anthony took her beautiful little granddaughter to see her great-grandfather, Cindy's father, who was in a nursing facility in Mount Dora. Cindy Anthony took her video camera and a still camera with her to record the events of Father's Day of 2008, June 15th. Cindy Anthony, unknowingly, of course, at that time, took the last known photograph of her granddaughter, Kaylee Anthony. On that Father's Day in Mount Dora, Kaylee Anthony snuggled with her great-grandfather, who she called Papa. She colored, she read, she sang, and she had fun. Eventually, the afternoon grew longer, and Cindy, her grandma, decided they needed to leave. Cindy Anthony returned to the home on Hope Spring with Kaylee, and they swam in the pool, and Kaylee had fun. Casey Anthony, according to her cell phone records from that day, spent most of it with her new boyfriend, Tony Lazaro. She arrived back at the Hope Spring address, again according to her cell phone records, around 7:30 in the evening. As I told you, George Anthony worked the 3 to 11 shift. And according to testimony that you will hear from both George and Cindy Anthony, that evening appeared to be fine. They went to bed, readied themselves for the typical start to a work week, or so they thought. On Monday, June 16th, Cindy Anthony goes to work, as I've described, sometime between 7 and 8 a.m., and is out of the house until the late evening. Until the early. George Anthony, again, has to work the 3 to 11 shift and is up early, had breakfast with his granddaughter, Kaylee, and noted that his daughter, Casey, began to get ready for work around noon, shortly before. George Anthony specifically recalls that at 12:50 p.m. on June 16th of 2008, his daughter, Casey, left the residence on Hope Spring Drive with Kaylee Marie Anthony. Kaylee was wearing a pink shirt, jean shorts, sunglasses, and a backpack. And George Anthony, kissed his granddaughter goodbye and never saw her again. In fact, no one but Casey Anthony ever saw Kaylee Marie Anthony alive again. We've already shown you the last photographs taken of Kaylee Anthony. The next time a photograph is taken of Kaylee Anthony is on December 11th of 2008. The story of this case is not about Casey Anthony. It is about what happened between the photograph taken on Father's Day, June 15th, 2008, and the photograph taken on December 11th of 2008. What happened to Kaylee Marie Anthony? You will hear during the testimony in this case that no one had any idea anything had befallen Kaylee Marie Anthony until July 15th of 2008. How can that be? What happened between June 16th and July 15th? Where was Kaylee Marie? Days passed between the time that anyone but Casey Anthony saw Kaylee and when she was reported missing by her grandmother, Cindy Anthony. So what happened? Day 1, Monday, June 16th, 2008. Cell phone records for Casey Anthony show that she did not leave the area of her parents' house until after 4 p.m. that day, despite the fact that her father saw her leave the residence at 12:50. When she leaves, she tells her father, George, that she's going to spend the night with Kaylee, with a babysitter. She told her mother that she was going to spend the night with a babysitter by the name of Zanny. You will learn during the testimony and evidence in this case, there is no Zanny. Like Casey Anthony's job, Casey Anthony's babysitter was a figment of her imagination. There is no Zanny. So when Casey Anthony appears on a surveillance video at the Blockbuster with her boyfriend, Tony Lazzaro, on the night of June 16th of 2008 at 7:54 p.m., where is Kaylee Anthony? Day 2. Tuesday, June 17th, 2008. Casey Anthony's cell phone records show that she was at her boyfriend Tony's apartment until about 2 in the afternoon, at which point in time she traveled to Hope Spring Drive, her parents' house, and was there from 2:45 p.m. until 4:30 in the afternoon. Her car was seen backed into the garage, according to a neighbor by the name of Brian Burr. Brian Burr didn't see Kaylee Anthony. Again, Casey Anthony told her mother, Cindy, that they would be spending the night again with Zanny. She spent the night with Tony Lazzaro. Tony Lazzaro will testify Kaylee wasn't there. So on Tuesday, June 17th of 2008, where is Kaylee Marie Anthony? Day 3, Wednesday, June 18th. Again, cell phone records established that Casey Anthony was in the area of Tony Lazzaro's apartment until about 12:30 in the afternoon. From 12:30 until 1:15 or so, Casey Anthony is attempting to call the house or her parents. Brian Berner, the neighbor, sees Casey Anthony again. Backs her car into the garage. And at about 1:30, 2:30 in the afternoon, asks Brian Berner if she can borrow a shovel. He will testify that she had the shovel for maybe an hour or so and returned it. He didn't notice anything unusual about its condition. George Anthony worked that day from 3 to 11 p.m. Cindy Anthony, again, inquiring about the whereabouts of her granddaughter, who had spent no more than a day away from her grandparents' home in her life. Casey Anthony told Cindy, her mother, that she was going to be at a conference in Tampa for work, and that Kaylee would be with Zanny and two other people, Juliet and Annabelle. Casey Anthony's story grows. There is no Zanny, there is no Juliet, there is no Annabelle. Casey Anthony spent Wednesday, June 18th with Tony Lazzaro that night. Tony will say Kaylee wasn't there. So on Wednesday, June 18th of 2008, where is Kaylee Marie Anthony? Day 4, Thursday, June 19th, 2008. George Anthony typically didn't work on Thursdays at that time. So there is no indication in Casey Anthony's cell phone records that she came back to the house at all. The cell phone records established that she was in the area of Tony Lazzaro's apartment for a lengthy period of time, traveling away from the apartment, and ultimately you will hear the testimony of an individual by the name of Matthew Chris, who will indicate that on that day, Casey Anthony was looking for apartments for her boyfriend, Tony Lazzaro. Matthew Chris and Tony Lazzaro didn't see Kaylee Anthony that day. Casey Anthony was back at Tony Lazzaro's apartment by 9 o'clock that night. Kaylee Anthony wasn't. So on June 19th of 2008, where is Kaylee Anthony? Or a deputy that came, goes and tells the neighbor, Brian Berner, or Brian Berner's son, that there's a vandal, that there's somebody stealing things in the neighborhood. Basically, keep a lookout. While George Anthony may have normally been at work that day, he ended up having an interview for another security job at 6:30 that evening, so he was at home. And at about 2:30, Casey Anthony shows up. No Kaylee. No Tony. Just Casey in her white Pontiac Sunfire. Her dad is happy to see her, wants to know where Kaylee is. Tells Casey, I miss Kaylee, where is she? I'd like to see that little girl. We miss her. And Casey Anthony dismissively says, I have 10 minutes, I have to get back to work. George Anthony has an idea that the missing gas can may be in his daughter's possession. So he tells her he needs something from her car. And that he's going to go get it out of the trunk. At which point she brushes past him, goes to the trunk of the car, takes out the gas cans, throws them or pushes them in his direction, and says, here's your fucking cans. Gets in her car and leaves. Immediately starts calling her mother about it. On that day as well, you will hear from the testimony of another of Casey Anthony's friends by the name of Troy Brown, who received a Facebook message from Casey Anthony that she hasn't been at her parents' house for the last 9 days because of trauma. Day 10, June 25th of 2008. Casey Anthony begins to tell her friend Amy Huizenga that there is a smell in her car, and it seems to be coming from the engine. Cindy Anthony, as you might imagine, continued to ask for her granddaughter and was told we're still at the hospital. Day 11, Thursday, June 26, 2008. You will hear that the cell phone records of Casey Anthony show that she was at Tony's all day. No Kaylee. Where's Kaylee? Again, Cindy Anthony presses, and Casey Anthony tells her that Zanny, this babysitter, was released late from the hospital. We're going to spend another night at the hotel. You've heard that before. Day 12, Friday, June 27th of 2008. You will hear that Casey Anthony's cell phone records show that around 11 a.m. that she is in the area of her parents' house on Hope Spring. And that she spent about half an hour in that area. And that shortly after 11:30 that morning, she begins to text Amy Huizenga, her friend, about a dead animal being plastered to the frame of her car. Within minutes of that text, Casey Anthony's white Pontiac Sunfire runs out of gas again. This time, at an Amscot on University Boulevard in Orlando, next to a dumpster. And so you will hear that Casey Anthony calls Tony Lazaro, her boyfriend, to come get her. He does. And when he does, she has with her what appears to be grocery bags full of either clothes or items from a refrigerator, someone's refrigerator. No Kaylee Anthony. You will see that video was taken of Casey Anthony and Tony Lazaro at a JCPenney's on June 27th of 2008 at 2:51 p.m. Tony will tell you that he thinks she bought some shoes. Because that night, they went back to Fusion. Cindy Anthony, pressing her daughter, wants to know where Kaylee Anthony is. At this point, Casey tells her, well, we're back in town. I have a late meeting. I'm going to meet up with Jeff Hopkins. He's in Orlando, and we're going to stay with him at the Hard Rock Hotel. Now, there is a Jeff Hopkins that is an acquaintance of Casey Anthony, except that he wasn't in Orlando on June 27th, and he wasn't at the Hard Rock Hotel. And he didn't have contact with Casey Anthony. Jesse Grunn, you will hear, is a former fiance of Casey Anthony who had contact with her that day. He inquires after Kaylee, and she tells Jesse Grunn she's with the nanny. Amy Huizenga inquires about Kaylee, and she tells Amy Huizenga that Kaylee is at the beach. So on Friday, June 27th of 2008, where is Kaylee Anthony? Days 13 and 14, Sunday, June 28th and June 29th, the weekend. Again, Casey Anthony is telling her mother she's at the Hard Rock Hotel. Her cell phone records tell a different story. She's at Tony's. They're going to the movies. They rent a video at Blockbuster. Day 15, Monday, June 30th of 2008, Tony Lazaro had a pre-planned trip to New York, where he's from. So Casey Anthony takes him to the airport, and he allows her full use of his car. Hers is still at the Amsco, where it's been since Friday, next to the dumpster. But not for long. The manager at Amscot, you will learn, called the tow company, because this car is sitting in their lot next to the dumpster, and no one's come to claim it or get it or say anything about it. So Johnson's Wrecker, a local tow company, comes and tows Casey Anthony's white Pontiac Sunfire to their lot on Narcoossee Road in South Orlando. where it stays until July 15th of 2008. On June 30th, while Casey Anthony's and Tony's car and her car is being towed to Johnson Wrecker, she goes to Target with Amy Huizenga and is captured on video. No Kaylee Anthony. She goes to the JCPenney's at Fashion Square Mall. No Kaylee Anthony on that video. She's back at Target before 9 o'clock that night. No Kaylee Anthony. Cindy Anthony, once again, pressing, pushing, wants to know, where is my granddaughter? And Casey Anthony tells her, again, that she's working late, and now Kaylee is with somebody named Jennifer Rosa, who is supposed to be a relative or a roommate of Zanny. And you will hear that Casey Anthony tells her mother, we're going to be staying with these people until July 3rd. And she tells her mother that Jennifer Rosa and Kaylee are going to go to Universal Studios. You will hear from the testimony in this case that the week of June 30th of 2008, all the way through the 4th of July weekend, Cindy Anthony was on vacation. And being on vacation, she wanted to spend time with her granddaughter, Kaylee, who at this point she has now not seen for over 2 weeks. So on Tuesday, July 1st, day 16, Cindy Anthony begins to insistently call Casey. On July 1st, with her boyfriend, Tony, now in New York, Casey Anthony doesn't have a place to stay. She's been staying with Tony for the last 2 weeks. So at 9 o'clock in the morning or so, she shows up at the apartment of her former fiancé, Jesse Grunge, to take a shower. By 4 or 5 that afternoon, she's back at a JCPenney with her friend Amy. That evening, there are multiple calls from the Anthony household to Casey Anthony's cell phone trying to get a hold of her. You will learn that on that date, Casey Anthony went to the Ale House, which is a restaurant bar here in Orlando, with some guy friends she has. Cindy Anthony begins texting about where's Kaylee. And Casey Anthony tells her that Kaylee's at the park with this Jennifer Rosa. This pattern continues into Wednesday, July 2nd, day 17, where there were multiple attempts to call Casey Anthony from the Anthony home on Hope Spring. When Amy Huizenga asks Casey Anthony, where's Kaylee? She tells her she's with a nanny. And while all of that is going on around Casey Anthony, she makes an appointment to get a tattoo. She goes to Ross to buy some clothes or shoes. She goes to a nightclub called Voyage, another one called Mako, and then ultimately spends the night at Amy and Amy's roommate Ricardo's apartment. You will hear from the testimony and the evidence in this case that on day 18, Thursday, July 3rd, Cindy Anthony has had about enough of this. Again, she's on vacation. She's making multiple calls to Casey Anthony. Since Casey had said Kaylee's going to be at Universal Studios at a character breakfast, Cindy gets in her own car and drives to Universal Studios. She wants to see Kaylee. And when she gets there, calls her daughter, "I'm here at Universal Studios. I want to pick up Kaylee," words to that effect. Casey Anthony says, "We're in Jacksonville." Jeffrey Hopkins, the guy that we were at the Hard Rock with, well, he's from Jacksonville, so we're going to hang out in Jacksonville for a while. You will hear from the testimony. Cindy Anthony is beside herself. That night, Cindy Anthony creates a MySpace page that she titles, "My Kaylee is Missing," and writes a paragraph or more about her thoughts and feelings. Her Kaylee was missing. And again, while this is going on around her, Casey Anthony gets a tattoo, tells the guy at the tattoo shop that Kaylee is with the nanny. Sends a text to her ex-fiance, Jesse Grund, that if my family tries to contact you, tell them nothing. They're basically crazy. She goes shopping at the Florida Mall, which is in South Orlando, with a girl she just met by the name of Melissa England. While somebody at the Anthony home is trying to call her, trying to find her. Eventually, at about 8 o'clock that night, somebody at the Anthony home, Cindy, you will hear from the testimony, contacts her son, Casey Anthony's older brother, Lee. Lee Anthony tries to find his sister based on some research he did on people's Facebook pages, where he hears or reads or learns that his sister is going to be at a nightclub in downtown Orlando that night. So Lee Anthony gathers up his girlfriend or fiance, Mallory, and they go downtown, and Lee searches for Casey and can't find her. During this process, Lee Anthony had sent a message or called Annie Downing, one of Casey Anthony's friends, who alerted Casey Anthony that her brother was looking for her. Casey Anthony, you will hear, got herself out of downtown Orlando. Day 19, Friday, July 4th. Casey Anthony is perpetuating this lie to her mother that they're in Jacksonville. However, she tells her former fiance, Jesse Grund, that Kaylee's at SeaWorld with the nanny. You will hear from an individual by the name of Will Waters, a guy Casey met July 4th, 2008. That she was at his house planning a party for the 4th of July. And they went to Lake Eola, which is in downtown Orlando, where they have an annual 4th of July fireworks display. And he took a picture. Casey Anthony having a good time on the 4th of July of 2008. Tony Lazzaro comes home on day 20, Saturday, July 5th. Before he arrives, Casey Anthony is captured on video with Will Waters at an IKEA here in Orlando. No Kaylee Anthony. Is talking excitedly about the fact that her boyfriend, Tony, is coming back from New York. And goes to a place called Buffalo Wild Wings that night with Tony. In the meantime, she didn't forget to tell her mother that her car is now broken down in Jacksonville. And Jeffrey Hopkins is helping her get it fixed. And now, we're not going to be back till July 12th. Another week. Buying time, the evidence will show. She tells Cindy that Kaylee Anthony is now staying with Jeffrey Hopkins' mother and Jeffrey Hopkins' son, Zachary. You will hear from Jeffrey Hopkins that none of that is true. So we go through day 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. No one knows where Kaylee is. And Casey Anthony is just gallivanting around Orlando, captured on video at Target, captured on video at a Bank of America eventually. And there's no Kaylee Anthony on any of these videos. So where is she? On Friday, July 11th, day 26, Casey Anthony's back at Fusion, a nightclub. On July 12th, day 27, Cindy is getting text messages from Casey that she's still in Jacksonville. She's really at a Winn-Dixie at 9:30 that night, captured on video. Sunday, July 13th, which is now day 28. Casey Anthony tells her mother that they had to stay longer past July 12th in Jacksonville because of a wedding. Jeff Hopkins' mother's wedding. And finally, we get to day 30. Tuesday, July 15th of 2008. You will hear that over the weekend, George and Cindy Anthony were doing some yard work and had noticed that a letter had been placed in the front door. They had to go to the post office to retrieve whatever this item was. George Anthony was unable to accomplish or take care of that errand on July 14th. So on July 15th, he goes to the post office, retrieves this letter, and it's from Johnson's record. Although Casey Anthony had exclusive possession of the white Pontiac Sunfire, the car was titled in George and Cindy Anthony's name. And so when it was towed to Johnson's Wrecker, the wrecker company eventually sent a letter to the registered owners, George and Cindy Anthony. Here's where your car is. Come get it and bring cash. So George and Cindy Anthony drive to Johnson's Wrecker, and while Mrs. Anthony deals with the people at the front desk, George Anthony goes with an individual by the name of Simon Birch to retrieve the car. Along the way, George Anthony is telling Mr. Birch of these problems that the family is having, that he hasn't seen his granddaughter or his daughter for days. And as they approach the vehicle, an overwhelming smell is emanating from it. And it's coming from the trunk. George Anthony will tell you that he said a silent prayer, that it was neither his daughter or his granddaughter that he would find in the trunk of that car. Simon Birch, who you will learn has spent many years in the tow business and has seen and heard and smelled just about everything associated with a car, including when someone committed suicide inside a car and it sat for days. So Simon Birch will give you his opinion based on this experience about what that smell was. And as that's going through his mind, and he hears George Anthony making these statements about his missing daughter and granddaughter, Simon Birch as well is hoping that they're not going to find a body in the trunk. And when the trunk is open, there's a bag of garbage inside. And you will hear that Simon Birch took that bag of garbage and threw it over a fence at Johnson's Wrecker and eventually placed it into a dumpster there. George Anthony got into that car, drove it home. When Cynthia Anthony had her first contact with the car, her words to George Anthony were, "Jesus, what died?" At which point, her proceeded to tell her that there had been garbage in the car. So George and Cindy Anthony go back to their house on Hope Spring Drive. Now, obviously frustrated about the fact that this car is not in Jacksonville, where Casey said she was with Caleb. And that it had been, they learned, at this tow yard since June 30th. So they knew she was lying. George Anthony had to be at work at 3 o'clock that afternoon. They put the car in the garage at their house to air out. Cindy Anthony goes back to work as well and is communicating about the smell to her coworkers. And they eventually convince her she needs to call the police. Cindy Anthony texts Casey Anthony about 4:30 that afternoon that there's a major problem, that she needs to contact her. In the meantime, while all this is going on with George and Cindy Anthony, Casey Anthony is happily in her friend Amy Huizenga's car, because days earlier, Amy had taken a trip to Puerto Rico. And now Casey has her car. And on July 15th in the afternoon, Casey Anthony makes an appointment for another tattoo. Tells the guy at the tattoo place that she's going to bring Kaylee in with her when she gets this tattoo. Is captured on a Bank of America surveillance video, cashing a check about 1:30. As she's driving to the airport, she speaks with a woman, a girl, a young lady by the name of Erica Gonzalez. Gives Erica the impression that Kaylee's in the car with her. When she picks up Amy, she tells Amy that she got a call from Kaylee Anthony that day on her cell phone. And eventually, Amy Huizenga drops off Casey Anthony at her boyfriend, Tony Lazzaro's apartment. Amy Huizenga, you will hear from the testimony, goes with friends of hers in her car to the Florida Mall. And Cindy Anthony is at home, trying to figure out a way to get in touch with Casey Anthony. And so she goes through items that were left in the car. Kaylee's car seat was in the car. Casey Anthony's shoes are in the car. Some clothes are in the car. There are dryer sheets in the car. There are items in the trunk, in a bin in the car. There is a bag that Cindy Anthony thought Casey used for work. And in that bag is contact information for Amy Huizenga. who Cindy Anthony never met. So Cindy Anthony calls Amy Huizenga and asks if she's seen Casey or Kaylee. Well, Amy just saw Casey. She knows exactly where she is. And even though the two had never met, Cindy Anthony on that day, on July 15th of 2008, is not going to be denied access to her granddaughter to the point where she is tracking down her daughter Casey's friends. Despite some hesitation, and because of the sound in Cindy Anthony's voice, Amy Huizenga agrees to allow Cindy Anthony to come pick her up at the Florida Mall. And Cindy Anthony drives down there, gets Amy in the car, is telling her all about what's been going on. And Amy directs Cindy Anthony to Tony Lazzaro's apartment. Amy goes up to the door with Cindy behind her, knocks on it, and gets Casey Anthony out of there. Kaylee Anthony's not there. Where's Kaylee Anthony? You will hear that Cindy Anthony basically pulls Casey out of there without her phone, without her belongings. And she gets in the car. They drop Amy off. And at this point, Cindy Anthony is not going to be denied access to her granddaughter, who has now been gone for a month. Casey Anthony tries the same old Zanny story with Cindy. But Cindy Anthony will not be denied access to her granddaughter. And since Casey Anthony is stonewalling, telling her mother she doesn't want to upset Kaylee, she doesn't want to disrupt this routine that she's now in, Kaylee's going to be upset, Cindy has had enough and decides that the only way I am going to get access to my granddaughter is to get the police involved. So she drives Casey Anthony in her car to a substation of the Orlando Police Department, which at that time of the night is closed, and makes her first 911 call from her car, from the parking lot of that Orlando Police Department substation. During the course of this trial, you will hear that first call that Cindy Anthony made to the Orlando Police Department. She wants her daughter arrested. The dispatcher from the Orlando Police Department is trying to determine if there is a crime that's been committed and where that crime has occurred. So in making this inquiry, it is determined that the address on Hope Spring Drive, where the Anthonys live, is actually within the jurisdiction of the Orange County Sheriff, not the Orlando Police Department. And they give Cindy Anthony a choice about whether or not she wants to wait on the side of the road for a deputy to show up or go back to her house and make another call, and she chooses the latter. During this exchange, and while there is some dead air between the dispatcher and Cindy Anthony, you can hear Cindy Anthony threatening to take Kaylee away from Casey Anthony. And Casey Anthony asked her for one more day. You will learn that during this exchange, George Anthony, who's been apprised of some of this, not all of it, some of it, calls Lee Anthony, Casey's older brother, and says, "You need to get to the house." So Lee Anthony, who lives in the area, arrives at the house on Hope Spring Drive just before Cindy and Casey Anthony. And as they pull up, they get out, they rush in, he gets no information. There's the car in the garage. He notices himself that there is an overpowering smell, indescribable smell associated with that car. And as they all rush in the house, Cindy Anthony basically tells Lee to get information from your sister. She's not telling me anything. I want her to take me to Kaylee now. Shortly thereafter, Cindy Anthony makes her second 911 call, which you will hear. This time, it goes to the Orange County Sheriff's Office. And she again talks about having her daughter arrested and mentions at that time a possible missing 3-year-old. The dispatcher, in trying to get some information, elicits from Cindy Anthony that her daughter, Casey, will not tell her where Kaylee is. So when patrol units of the Orange County Sheriff's Office are initially dispatched to this call, they're unsure whether or not this is a stolen vehicle call. Is this some other theft call? Is this a domestic incident? Because while Cindy Anthony is waiting, and it does take a while for the sheriff's office to arrive, based on the priority levels that they give calls, Lee Anthony is talking to Casey Anthony, who is now in her room. And Lee Anthony is trying to convince Casey Anthony to just take Mom, Cindy, to Kaylee. What's the problem? This is going to happen anyway. Why are you doing this? To the point where Lee Anthony eventually engages in what can only be termed as a role-playing episode with his sister, where Lee Anthony pretends to be the police officer and says, "Miss Anthony, good evening. I see that you're having a problem here with your mother. Why don't we just resolve this? You take us to the child and everything will be fine. We'll all go home. We'll all be happy."
Stop for a moment. It's been going for about an hour and a half. Let viewers take a break. We're going to take a recess. Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to take a 15-minute recess at this time. I'm going to ask you not to discuss this case among yourselves nor with anyone else. Please remember all of my previous admonitions. We'll be in recess for 15 minutes.